Hello and welcome to the Flipside with your host, me, Dr. Michael Nichols. This is our fourth episode. I want to thank you for joining in. And as always, make sure you follow this program. The numbers help us keep growing and growing. And go to our link tree, which is on the website that you saw at the beginning, and it will repeat at the end. Today's episode is titled What They Got Wrong. So I guess the question is, who is they? And then the other question is, well, what did they get wrong? Back in episode 1, I started off this whole journey by talking a little bit about what I was referring to as the philosophy or philosophies, really, of health. There isn't one, there's a multitude. And I went over the two basic core philosophical ideas. One was a holistic mindset, which is called vitalism. And that is really what encompasses the vast majority, if not all, alternative health practitioners, chiropractors, acupuncturists, naturopaths in general, for the most part. And on the flip side to that coin, did you get that? The flip side of that coin is Western medical model. And the Western medical model, which would be, of course, medical doctors and all of the agencies that go within that, okay, would be empiricism, which is more of a reductionist type of philosophical model. One, which is the reductionist philosophical model, basically says that the sum is equal to its parts. So we can figure out everything just by looking at its parts, and we will know the facts. It's empirical. Empirical scientific data is what we're going to use. The other model, the vitalistic model, which is, once again, like I said, more alternative, including chiropractic, which I'm a chiropractor, is the vitalistic approach, which says the sum is greater than its parts, that there's far more to this being than just these physical parts. That keeps it alive and keeps it healthy, and that there's really no way for us to ever know everything. And that doesn't mean that we reject science. That doesn't mean that we don't use science in our approaches. It just means that in our looking at science and in our usage of science, we respect that there's something vitalistic to this system that is always going to be outside of our reach. And that is really the thing that's actually fully in command of what's happening here, not the doctor. The doctor is the assistant more than the director. The Western medical model seems to have a problem with that idea. Now, let me also just back up and say that, and I said this in the very first episode, I'm not saying that all medical doctors think the same way, that all chiropractors or alternative doctors think the same way. I would say there's certainly the vast majority of those camps do think the same way, or at least very similar. But of course, there's always differences. I know chiropractors who have very, very medical mindsets, very empirical type of approach with things, and reject more of a vitalistic idea. And I know a few, not as many, medical doctors who have a much more vitalistic approach and think of the body in that sense of a much more broader sense. So it's a broad assumption or a broad perception that I'm putting out here about these models. So I want you to understand that I do recognize that there are differences in opinions, and maybe you have chiropractors or doctors who have these thinking. But with that as an understanding, with that as our base, I want to then look at some ideas, some things that the Western medical camp have gotten wrong over the decades that the alternative camp was correct about all along. And once again, there were doctors that believed in these things. It wasn't everybody, but we're going to talk the vast majority. So when I'm saying this, understand I'm saying the vast majority. These ideas, these concepts, these things, these issues that I'm going to talk about today in this episode are things that have, for the most part, been shown now to be correct, that the alternative camp was correct all the time, that the whole time the alternative camp was being referred to as conspiracy theorists or quacks or nut jobs or whatever other derogatory thing the Western model was trying to throw at the alternative model to try to denigrate them because they didn't believe in these concepts or ideas, was wrong. I think there's a lot of you who would watch this who, especially in light of the recent years, the past 4 or 5 years, have started to switch their thinking a little bit to where instead of believing everything that they were getting from that Western medical model, they're now questioning it and questioning it in a much bigger, much stronger way, to where they're saying, well, maybe I shouldn't have just listened to what they were saying and done what they were saying without any kind of thinking. Now I'm going to actually question that and say, is that correct? Is that really true? These people over here are saying this. What's the difference? And I'm happy for that. I'm grateful for that. I think it's actually very healthy that the meter has started to shift in a certain direction. It's shifting away from a full trust and belief for that system and questioning it more now. The Western medical model fears that. They do not like the fact that it's being questioned. They are fighting it tooth and nail, which is what we see with, you've heard me talk about Bobby Kennedy, and his confirmation hearing is either going to be in process or have just completed by the time you probably watch this episode. And he is being demonized. He's being attacked like crazy. And that attack is coming from that direction. It's coming from that Western medical model. This Western medical model based on empirical data that is saying that the sum is equal to its parts, that you are just a body of parts that we can put together and we can figure out what it is. And if we can't figure out what it is, then there is no answer. So that's where this is coming from. So what kind of things did the Western medical model get wrong and the alternative medical get right? Before I answer that, I want to cover one little point. Now, I'm only going to do this from the standpoint of chiropractic because I can speak to that with full confidence because I know the information fully well. I can't speak this for acupuncture or naturopathy or homeopathy or any of the other alternative fields. I can't speak to it with as much confidence. And that is coming from the point of education. The Western medical model, and this would make a great topic for another talk at some point, the Western medical model has attacked the alternative professions for countless decades. I mean, since the turn of the century, since the early 1900s, since chiropractic came into existence, since any of these other things came into existence, if they threaten the authority of the Western medical model at all, they are attacked and attacked full blown. And chiropractic has received probably more of that than any of the other alternative professions, primarily because chiropractors encroach into territory that the Western medical model says, this is our territory. You cannot cross this line. This is us. This is you. You stay over there and you shut up. And that's the way they tend to approach it. And so as such, because chiropractors have more respect and authority out of the alternative models, they are the lead for what the Western model wants to attack. And chiropractors have long been referred to by people from that camp as quacks. And the whole definition of quacks is someone who speaks but really doesn't know what they're talking about and that you shouldn't trust them. So what I wanted to show you as just something to start this model off, and I'm going to pull this up here on our screen here. As usual, I have to find it first. Where is it? Is that it there? There it is. Okay, so here we go. And that's not the correct screen. There we go. All right. So this is a table format of information that you can find readily all over the internet. And that is, you can find information that compares chiropractic school hours for courses compared to medical school hours for courses. And of course, this is the average. Looking at the average chiropractic, average medical, these are the number of hours per classes, per courses that each of these schoolings get. Chiropractors are often looked at as kind of the bastard stepchild, that we do not have the education and the understanding of these medical concepts that the medical doctors do. So how could you listen to a chiropractor, because all they do is crack backs, right? So I want you to look at this. I want you to look at the average chiropractic hours in school versus the average medical hours in school. And if you look down at the bottom, 4,485 for chiropractic, 4,248 for medical school. A lot of people would be very shocked about that. They would think that, hey, isn't chiropractic a certificate? No, it's a doctorate program. It is a very difficult doctorate program where we get a lot of people that drop out, just like with medical school. There's a high dropout rate, and there's, people that pass it have to have the smarts, and they have to have the acumen to get through the courses. It is not an easy program. If you look at anatomy and embryology, those courses, we have 520 hours compared to 508 hours for medical school, 440 hours of physiology versus 326 hours of physiology, 360 hours of pathology, geriatrics, and pediatrics, whereas medicine has 401. They have more of that. Pathology tends to be more favored on their side, but not by a whole lot. If we keep going down, chemistry they have more of, but diagnosis, look at diagnosis. 130 hours of diagnosis in chiropractic versus 114 in medical. That would shock a lot of people, because they think of, well, isn't medicine diagnosis? Chiropractors really don't diagnose. Chiropractors do diagnose. They don't diagnose the same things for the most part, because medicine is looking at, cancers and all sorts of other things. Chiropractors don't tend to look at those kind of things, even though we're taught to recognize them. Diagnosis for dermatology, ears, eyes, nose, throat, 630 for chiropractic, 324 for medicine. Over double, okay? Neurology, 320 versus 112. Radiology, learning how to look at x-rays, 360 versus 148. Psychology, this is the part that really surprised me. Medicine has more than double, or almost double, in psychology. And I will tell you, I think Western medicine is horrible at bedside manner. So I don't know where the psychology goes into play. And then the last part, there's specialty courses, 1,598 versus 1,492. And part of what's in that is nutrition. Chiropractors have more nutritional training than medical doctors on average. So I hope this comes as a shock to you, because I hope it also enlightens your brain and says, well, wait a minute, I didn't realize that chiropractors went through so much education, that it is as good or better than a lot of medical schools. Now, when we're talking about, Harvard Medical School versus the top chiropractic school, I'm sure there's a bigger discrepancy. But once again, on average, on whole, not every medical doctor goes to Harvard. Not every medical doctor goes to Yale or Stanford. So when you look at the average medical college on average and the average chiropractic school on average, this is what it looks like. So like I said, I hope it actually is a little shocking for you. Now, why did I show that as the beginning point? Because I want you to understand that when I'm talking about the alternative world, I'm talking about the entire alternative world, not just chiropractic. But from the chiropractic perspective, this is an educated perspective. These are people who have gone to school. They've gotten a bachelor's degree, typically in some type of health-related subject. Mine was in exercise science and nutrition. And then they went on to get a doctorate in chiropractic, which is, as you just saw, quite extensive. And so when we talk about things, we're not talking about things because someone just told us this story and we believed it. For myself, when I hear information, my process is to not just simply glam onto it and believe it right out of the gate. It's not what I do. And to the frustration of some people that I know who know me, who are like, why does it take you so long to come around to this thinking? This is what it is. I'm like, just because you say it is, doesn't mean I'm going to believe it. I like to prove it for myself. And so I'm that way with pretty much everything. So if I see a research article Okay, let's say I see something on Twitter. This is what gets criticized all the time. You get something on social media, and social media is convincing everybody that this is what's real, and it's not. It's conspiracy theory. It's misinformation. Social media has become and is becoming the lead source for information. Is that a disaster? The people on one side camp would like to tell you it's a disaster because they can't control it. That's the problem. They can't control the information. That scares them. But if you're doing social media, for me, if I get something on Twitter, if something comes to me and it says, here is this study, okay? For example, I posted onto my Facebook account recently a study, and I'm not gonna be able to say it exactly, but it was a study on soft drinks and diabetes or something like that. I can't remember. If you go to Facebook, you'll see it. And of course, when I saw it, I'm like, well, duh, of course. I mean, this is kind of old news. This is stuff that's been talked about for decades, but let's look at this. So as opposed to just saying, oh, yes, and being done, I went to the article. The article was not the research. It was an article talking about that. So here's my next step. If there's an article talking about research, I don't take the article's word for it. I find the research paper itself and then look up the research paper. Now, Google Scholar, if you're not familiar with that, Google Scholar, if you type that into the search bar at the top, you'll get a specialized section of Google that is only research. That's all it does is research. And this is from the research papers themselves, from the research journals. And I love Google Scholar. I look at Google Scholar all the time. I use it religiously. And I look up the actual research and I read the paper. And I'm not an expert at reading papers, but I've done it enough times to where I have a really good understanding of it. And I read the paper. Does the paper actually say what the article says it does? Because you may be surprised, or maybe not, that a lot of times the articles that you see in the New York Times or People Magazine or whatever magazine or article is being done, or even on the news is being talked about, that what they're giving you is the sound bite that the people who showed them this article wanted them to talk about. Okay. And that's an important distinction. You're getting sound bites. The sound bite is not necessarily the actual research. And so ignore sound bites. So when you see a sound bite in a journal or a paper or on TV, say, that's interesting. Don't buy into it yet, but say, that's interesting. Then go look up the actual research. What did the actual research say? And then the next step that I follow is to say, is there other research that also backs up this research? Is this the only piece of research that exists out there that says XYZ? Or is there other research that backs up this information and confirms it? And that's my process. So when I'm talking to you about stuff, this is the process that I've gone through before I start talking about it. I look to see that there's something that's backing this up, not just from a single perspective of one article, but there's more than that. Okay. So with that said, what did they get wrong? What are these topics that they got wrong? Well, it's kind of, it's innumerable. There are a lot of topics that side of things has gotten wrong. And let me clarify a little bit better. So when I'm going to say Western medicine, yes, I am talking about Western medical doctors, but let me also say that like I said, I do know medical doctors who think very similar to me, who think very similar to an alternative care doctor, in the sense that they're very open to all sorts of other things besides what they were taught in medical school. But the average medical doctor, probably more than the average, so going into the 75% range, I'm just throwing a number out there, but because they went into medical school to begin with, they probably already had a philosophical leaning that led them in that direction. And then while in school, that philosophical direction was reinforced and a way of thinking was reinforced. Therefore, when they come out, they have been indoctrinated to this thinking. And I'm not saying that that's totally negative, but that's the way any type of schooling is. Chiropractic would be the same way. You go in with a certain philosophical mindset, which led you to chiropractic, and it's reinforced in school to create a certain way of thinking. Now, not everybody stays like that. Therefore, there are Western medical doctors who see other things. They see other evidence. They're open-minded to see certain things, and it leads them in a certain direction. So as I go through these things that were gotten wrong, you will note that I will quote medical doctors in this, because there are medical doctors who were among that camp at the beginning who said this is wrong. But they were the small percentage, along with almost every single person in the alternative field, saying, you've got this wrong. You need to pay attention. This is unhealthy and it needs to change. And so that's what I'm saying with that. Now, the other part to that is this. On that Western medical camp, you also have the CDC. You also have the FDA. You also have all of those governing bodies. Okay. The Kennedy is being confirmed. Okay. And I'm just going to say that he's going to get confirmed for the head of the HHS. Okay. Health and Human Services. And like I said, I got that wrong in episode 2. So HHS. And as the head of the HHS, he'll be in charge of those agencies. With God's grace, he will be in charge of those agencies, because we need him to be in charge of those agencies, because those agencies are out of control. And you'll kind of see some of that as we go through this today. So when I say Western medical model, it includes not only the majority of Western medical doctors and people in those fields, but also the agencies that govern all of that, the American Medical Association, et cetera. Okay. So all of that camp versus the alternative camp. And in that alternative camp will be some crossover, some medical doctors that got it right. Okay. We clear on that? Good. All right. So let's look at, let's see, where do we want to start with this? You know what? Let's start off with something that we'll talk a little bit briefly about, but it's actually a really important one when it comes to Kennedy's confirmation, because this is one of the things that he's being kind of beat up on in public. If you've been following any of the information with Robert F. Kennedy and his journey towards confirmation as the head of the HHS, one of the topics that keeps coming up is, they always talk about him like he's a nut job. Like I said, that camp wants to call anybody in the other camp a nut job if they don't agree. If this camp doesn't agree with, the Western medical model, then they're a nut job, period. That's just the way it is. It doesn't matter if there's evidence or proof. Okay. So to the contrary, they're a nut job. So Bobby is slammed for what he has said about fluoride in the drinking water. Well, wait a minute. This has been around for so long. It's changed dental caries in the United States. Children are much healthier now with fluoride in the drinking water than they were before. And the mainstream media falls in that Western medical model, because the Western media, the mainstream media, is bought and paid for by the Western medical model. The Western medical model runs the media. That may sound strange to some of you, hopefully not for most of you watching, but for some of you it may sound strange. But if you think about the amount of advertising dollars that go into the mainstream media, the vast majority comes from the pharmaceutical industry. So that's Western medical model, and it comes from those special interests. So when they're telling you that fluoride in the drinking water is perfectly safe, they're lying to you. They're lying. Okay. It's ridiculous how much they're lying. And if you did any research of your own, you would be able to see it very clearly and simply. There's so much information out there to question fluoride in the drinking water in a huge question mark. Okay. Fluoride was, the first place to have fluoride in the drinking water was Michigan. I don't remember the city, but it was a city in Michigan, 1940s, 1945 maybe. They first placed drinking fluoride into the drinking water in this city in Michigan. And it wasn't until sometime in the 60s that the rest of the United States, it was placed into that. I do believe, and I could be wrong on this, but I do believe that Hawaii is the only place within the United States that does not have a history of fluoride in the drinking water. I could be wrong about that, but I think I'm right. So from the 60s to now, we have had fluoride in our drinking water. That's a long time, and so some people are like, well, then why aren't people, dying and dropping off like flies? Well, once again, if we go back to my episode 2, talking about chronic disease in our country, we're not healthier. We're healthier in some ways, and we are far unhealthier in others from that time period to now. So people will point to, well, we're living longer now than we did back then. Part of the reason that we're living longer now is medical intervention, meaning that with drugs and instruments keeping us alive longer. That's part of it, okay? But we're not going to get into that whole thing right now. Let's just focus on the fluoride in the drinking water. So it was put into the drinking water supposedly because it was shown to reduce cavities, dental caries, and that they wanted to just, hey, this is an easy way for us to protect the teeth of our children. Let's just put it into the drinking water and go from there. Now, I'm not going to get into the entire history of fluoride in the drinking water, but if you dig into it, there's a lot of very suspicious, somewhat nefarious information that tells you maybe that wasn't really the motivation. Maybe that motivation had more to do with something to do with, greenbacks. You always want to follow the money, right? So if you get curious looking into the history of fluoride in the drinking water, don't just do that on Google, because their search engines are still entirely skewed towards that Western medical model. If you Google just basic Google Scholar is different, okay? But basic Google, if you put in information on Google, at least the top 10, if they're not the top 20 or 30 things you're going to get in your search are going to be because the CDC and the FDA wanted you to see that. If you go to Yandex, which is another search engine, and you put in the same information, you're going to get entirely different things that pop up. So you can look at both camps and you can try to put the picture together, but you do have to do a very convoluted search to try to find facts nowadays, because Google is not great at giving you all of the perspectives. They are very heavily slanted towards the Western medical pharmaceutical model. And if it goes against that model, it's so far down in the search engine that you may not ever find it. So you've got to really be tricky about how you do that. You've got to use different search engines, and you've got to really dig deep through different search engines to find the information. That's another issue we could talk about at some point, is how effed up that is. So know that there's some really slippery, slimy ideas of why fluoride was put in the drinking water, not just for the safety of your children, the health of your children. There are numerous research studies, good, solid research studies, that show skeletal and dental fluorosis as a problem with ingesting fluoride. Now, let me clarify something. It's different. Putting fluoride on your teeth, like at the dentist's office where they put it on there topically, and then it's like you leave it on there and then you spit it out, you rinse it and you spit it out, or topically with toothpaste where you put it on, scrub it on your teeth, and then rinse it out really thoroughly and spit it out. That's different. You're only going to be ingesting traces, very, 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 very minute traces, because it's kept in your mouth and then you're washing it out and you're spitting it out. You're not ingesting it. Okay. So there is difference there. And that has shown to help with cavities. But when you're drinking it, okay, if this was tap water and there's fluoride in that tap water and I'm drinking it, and I will tell you that that's bottled water. Okay. Plastic, unfortunately, which I'm going to get to that one in a minute. This should have been glass, but I'm not perfect either. Fluoride in the drinking water, you're ingesting it, and the quantity of fluorine that you're putting into your body can create toxicity. So skeletal and dental fluorosis is a problem that creates joint stiffness, pain, and increased risks of fractures in the skeletal structure and in dental. Okay. It's been linked to various arthritic conditions. So joint arthritic conditions. And the part that is really alarming, the part that set Bobby Kennedy into his campaign against fluoride in drinking water, is that there are numerous studies that show lowered intelligence, lowered IQs in children. Populations that have the highest amount of fluoride in their drinking water over the longest period of time, it is linked to lowered intelligence in children. Okay. And so that is something that is alarming. And with Bobby, one of his big things is protecting kids. Okay. And when he sees something like this, that alarms him and it sets him off in a direction. And so the studies that have been linked to lowered intelligence in children are numerous, and they're good studies. And there's, like I said, there's a multitude of them. And so this is not new stuff. So when you see and hear the mainstream media saying things like, Kennedy wants to take the fluoride out of drinking water, this is crazy, blah, 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 know for a fact that there's money behind this. Okay. There's money behind this. Okay. And that is something that you need to understand, that when you see these people going against what he's saying, it's because there's money against this. So that's the first thing. That's the first thing I'll talk about right there. That camp has gotten fluoride wrong. There have been studies coming out against fluoride for decades. And my foray into the alternative world, it's hard for me to tell you exactly when it started because I've been doing this for so long, but I did personal training for about 14 years, starting in the late 80s through the 90s. And even at that point, even before I had gotten my bachelor's degree, before I'd gotten my chiropractic degree, I was kind of towards that camp because I was more about fitness and nutrition and keeping yourself, healthy from that perspective. Okay. From that perspective, sorry about that. I just got a little distracted there. One second here. All right. A little distracted there. But so for me, I've been aware of a lot of this stuff since at least the early 90s. And so I can speak authoritatively from my perspective from at least the early 90s to now. And the information that I was receiving from the early 90s was before that. So I know that for most of these topics that I'm going to talk about today, we're talking from 80s, at least, if not the 70s, up until now when it comes to this information. Okay. So fluoride has been a controversial issue among the alternative community for quite a while. And for those saying that it's perfectly safe, they're lying to you because the research does not support that. At the very least, and this could be said for all the topics that I'm going to talk about today. For at the very least, the science supports halting programs like this until we confirm otherwise. There's the whole thing, innocent until proven guilty, right? And so you would say, well, fluoride should be innocent until proven guilty. No. Anything that is putting out into a mass scale to society, if it's not proven, and I mean solidified, proven that it's okay before it's done there, is simply a science experiment, a massive science experiment, meaning that they're using you and your kids as a science experiment. And that's not correct. That is not right. That has to be shut down. And so if we have enough evidence to say, we got some really suspicious stuff, there's a problem here, the immediate reaction should be, okay, well, let's stop this and let's figure out what's going on, as opposed to continuing it, saying it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. Ignore that. Okay. That's something that you don't want. And that's fluoride. And that's the way fluoride has been for since its inception. Another note as we're continuing through this topic, when it comes to research, here's one of the reasons why you don't just take a research paper, one, and say, oh, it says this, so it must be this. Unfortunately, a lot of research is bought and paid for by the industry that wants a certain result. So let's say I'm a pharmaceutical company and I have a product and I want this product on the market, then I pay company or companies or scientists to do research to show that my product is safe. I'm paying the researcher to show that my product is safe, not to show the reality, not to show whether it's safe or not, but to show that it's safe. And the researching companies know that. They know that if I don't show that this is safe, then they're not going to pay for me to do this again. And this is a proven fact. When we talk about information in the research literature, there's an overwhelming amount of information in the research literature that says exactly what I'm saying right now, that talks about how this is rampant in the research community, that you can pretty much buy research to say whatever you want. So research has to be checked, double checked, and checked again, and it has to be done by sources that are as unbiased as you can get. If the source is not making money off of this, if they don't have a huge reason for doing this from that standpoint, then it's going to be, for the most part, probably more trustworthy. So you have to check your resources. So that's fluoride. So what's another one? Let's talk another one that's actually been around for quite a while. And this one is actually getting more traction now because of Bobby Kennedy, okay? Because of that MAHA movement. Callie Means and Casey Means, Dr. Casey Means and her brother Callie Means, are two central figures that have been pushing for changes in food colorings, changes in sweeteners, changes in ingredients in foods. So let's talk about artificial sweeteners. Here's another thing that they've got wrong. Fluoride was one. Artificial sweeteners, here's number two. Artificial sweeteners have been around for a long time, okay? A very long time. And so they've been in consumption in our food supply for, once again, a very long time. More in our food supply in the past 30 years than any other point in history, though. So even though they've been around since early 1900s is where I'm going to guess the beginning is somewhere around there. It's only been in the past 30 years that they've been in the quantity that they are now. And that's because there's a lot of people that think they're healthier than sugar. So therefore, there's tons of products on the market for artificial sweeteners. They've got a very interesting history. If you look at the history of artificial sweeteners, not all of the artificial sweeteners, but at least a couple of them, their beginnings came from coal tar, okay, and from chlorine. There were scientists doing studies with chlorine and doing studies with coal tar. And the funny thing too is that with both of these stories that I read, one with chlorine, one with coal tar, that the scientists that were doing these studies, after the studies were over, licked their fingers. You'd think safety 101 with a scientist dealing with toxic chemicals, you don't lick your fingers, right? You go through some kind of detoxive cleaning procedure to get stuff off your hands before you do that. But they licked their fingers and were surprised at how sweet their fingers tasted. And that was kind of the impetus to do more research into, why is this sweet? Can we use this? And so there were research into these products that started with chlorine and coal tar that then led to these becoming sweeteners. Interesting stuff, factual stuff, interesting stuff. Some of the sweeteners, so if we talked about some of the sweeteners are out there, there's a sulfame K, which is a sulfame potassium or sulfame K. That's seen in products like Sweet One and Sunnet. Aspartame, which is seen in products like NutraSweet and Equal, very high up there. People use a lot of that product. There's one called Neotame, which I think the product is just a play on the word. It's like new tame instead of Neotame. There's Saccharin, which is in Sweet and Low. Once again, one of the big ones out there. There's sucralose, which is Splenda. There are these purified stevia leaf extracts like Truvia, Purevia, and there's some other ones. And there's also sugar alcohols like sorbitol, erythritol, xylitol. Those are sugar alcohols. Now, these are all not created equally, and the dangers and potential dangers are not all the same for all of them, but I'm going to lump them all in together because these are fake products. These are made in a lab fake products to replace sugar, which is a made in a lab from nature product. Okay, so there's a big difference. This is a perfect example of that thinking of reductionism versus vitalism, or mechanism versus vitalism. The vitalistic thinking is this is a man-made in the laboratory product extracting information from a toxic product to make something for us to then take out something that's natural because we think it's unhealthy and put this in there because we think we've now made something better than nature could have made for us. That's not saying everything in nature is safe. It's not saying everything that man makes is dangerous, but we begin with that thought process as a vitalistic thinking. we begin with that thinking of, let's look at nature as a safer thing first than that lab. That lab taking coal tar and chlorine and trying to convert it into something to replace something in nature. Something suspicious about that. That's the thinking process with a vitalistic thinking. It starts there. Whereas the reductionist thinking says, well, we're really smart. We're really smart. And yeah, nature is great and all, but we're really smart. And we can do in the lab, and we can create something that's equal to, or we can even probably outdo what nature does in the lab. And there's this thinking that goes into that right off the bat, that we know better than nature. We know better than the universal intelligence of that. This is what we can do in a lab, and we're going to be able to do it better than nature. And as such, it'll be safer, it'll be healthier, etc. The vitalistic mindset looks at that and says, yeah, not so much. I don't think I trust that. So when we're looking at all these artificial sweeteners, the first thing I think of is why? Use sugar. Just use less of it. That's the whole thing. Do you think people use artificial sweeteners and then also use less of those? No, they use those in a large amount, as much so or more so than they would with regular sugar. And so therefore they're getting in a lot of this stuff. It's not just some very small amount. And they may use it as a packet sweetener in their coffee or their tea or something. And then it's also mixed into other drinks. It's also mixed into other foods that they're eating, and candy bars and health products that they're taking, protein powders with, aspartame in it or whatever. So they're taking these artificial flavorings in a lot of different formats. And so it's not just this tiny little amount. It's quite a bit, and they're being used a lot in our society. I think one of the earlier books that I read that was an excellent read, I still got it down in my library, was a book by Dr. Russell Blaylock. It's called Excitotoxins, the Taste That Kills. And in that, he talks about monosodium glutamate. He talks about aspartame and other products that are kind of these excitotoxic categories that have bad effects. When we look at research information on artificial sweeteners is very abundant. You can find a ton of research information. They have been linked to heart disease. They've been linked to stroke, cancers, and I'm going to come back to that. Type 2 diabetes, gut issues. That's a huge factor in that. One of the bigger ones as far as really solid evidence. Disrupting gut flora, which if you know anything about gut flora, you'll know the connections between gut flora and overall body health in general. They've actually been linked to obesity, which a lot of people are taking them because they want to lose weight, right? Or because they have diabetes. But diabetes and obesity are linked with these artificial sweeteners. Cancer was probably the biggest thing. Saccharin, and I'm not sure when the studies came out, 60s or 70s, there were research links to saccharin with cancer. Now, over time, a lot of those initial cancer research articles were shown to be false, not false, the research article itself, but the research was done on mice, and the mechanisms that they showed in the research articles with mice with cancer, it's a different mechanism. And those same mechanisms did not operate in the human body like they did in mice. So that was then put to bed, and they said, it's now proven that these artificial sweeteners do not cause cancer. But that's not entirely true. Urinary, kidney cancers have actually been shown to be a big question mark with these sweeteners, and digestive cancers, digestive and urinary cancers. So there are still cancer questions that are unanswered. When I went back through the research recently, just to kind of catch myself back up with it, there was one research article I read from 22, I think it was 2022, I do believe. There was another one that was, I think, 2017, so pretty recent, that I saw. And these were, once again, articles that were questioning in a big way, saying that there is definitely a link here between these sweeteners and these cancers. So heart disease, stroke, cancers, etc. There's a lot of things that are big question marks with these products. Are there problems with sugar? Of course there are. Okay, diabetes being one of them, weight gain, of course, even heart disease with sugar. Sugar is not the healthiest thing for us to consume, but you are far better off lowering your amount of sugar, because that's going to lower other bad things too, because sugar is in a lot of products that aren't that great for you to begin with. And so reducing your sugar content is a much healthier approach than replacing it with artificial sweeteners, which have questionable qualities. When people are drinking soda with artificial sweeteners, to me, that's like a 1-2 punch to the gut, because sodas in and of themselves are horrible products to begin with. Zero nutritional value, zero worth for you, for your health at all. And then you're also drinking one that has artificial sweeteners in it, which has its own question mark. Now you're hitting yourself in the head with a bat twice. And so, those are things to have with caution as well. So this is another thing. Alternative world has been yelling about artificial sweeteners for decades. And we're just now starting to see some bigger question marks coming from the Western community, the Western medical community, to start to question this. And there are, like Dr. Russell Blaylock, there are medical doctors who have come on board with that. Casey Means being another one of those people who is a highly educated Western medical doctor who looks at this stuff and says, no, this should not be in anybody's diet. In fact, we should pull it off the market. We shouldn't be using these things because they have too many questions about their safety, and they're not the alternative that we think of for switching from sugar. So that's another one. Okay, so another one of those big question marks that that alternative medicine got right. Western medicine world is still not getting it correct. What's another one? Another one would be microplastics, BPA, phthalates, PFAs, and others. So when I showed you this water bottle, okay, plastics. Now this is BPA free, but that doesn't mean that it still doesn't contain other things like microplastics. So drinking out of water bottles is not something that I would normally do. I don't normally drink out of water bottles. I needed something quick. I got this because I needed it. It's better for you to get hydration than to be dehydrated and have it be in a plastic bottle than it is to just, go thirsty. So I got this. pouring it into a glass. Maybe this is to justify and make myself feel better. That doesn't change the content because it came out of a plastic bottle. But the alternative world has been screaming about this issue with plastics for, once again, forever and a day. BPA was found as a chemical and still is found as a chemical in a lot of plastics. BPA was invented back in the late 1800s, but it was discovered as toxic in the 1930s. So it may have been developed in the late 1800s. 1930s was when it was found as toxic, but it wasn't banned from consumer consumption until 2012. So from 1930s to 2012, the Western medical system said, yeah, we know it's toxic, but whatever. And did nothing. They did nothing to change that at all until 2012. Now it's been banned from most consumer products. I don't think it's out of every consumer product, but most consumer products. So there's no BPA in this anymore. That's good. But the microplastics, which is basically essentially really tiny microscopic pieces of plastic that are floating around in this water because it was stored in plastic, it comes off in there. Heat makes it worse. If you put plastics in the microwave, you're heating up plastics. It leaches plastics and other chemicals from the plastic into the foods that you're eating. If you keep a water bottle out into the heat in the sun, same situation. I know when back in the 80s, the big thing was making sun tea. You had a plastic container that you put the tea bags in and water. You left it out in the sun all day. The sun heated up the water and made tea. And then you came home and you had your tea. And that was, once again, leaching out stuff into the teas. And I drank a ton of that stuff growing up. But what do you do? There's nothing I can do about that. I can only move forward and, once again, not kill myself when I do something. I don't beat myself up when I do something like that, because I know in general I don't do that. But that's a glaring example from the 1930s to 2012. What the hell took you so long to figure it out and get this stuff out of these products? The very first time it was shown to be toxic, there should have been, once again, this broad reach from that system to say, maybe something's wrong. Maybe we shouldn't allow these companies to make plastics and do these things with these chemicals, because those chemicals might start affecting people. And here's the big thing. A lot of these types of things that we're talking about, it's not a matter of I take a drink out of this water bottle once and I keel over dead. If that was the case, they'd be like a plane crashing and then another plane crashes. They say, wait a minute, that same model plane, there's something wrong with it. But they don't look at it like that. With a lot of these things, it may take decades before it starts to really show how ugly it is. But when you start to see that that's the problem, isn't it the responsibility at that point to do something about it and not tuck it under the rug and say there's too much money being made from this? The companies are protesting because it's going to cost them so much money. Who the freaking hell cares what those companies think? Those companies are there at our benefit and behest, not because we owe anything to them necessarily. They need to be making products that are safe for us, and they need to do that in a safe way that they can still make money, but in a safe way. And if it's found that what they're doing is not safe, it needs to be halted immediately, not later on, not tomorrow, not 10 years from now, but immediately, because our health should come first. Microplastics as a whole, and we'll just say plastics as just a generality, they act as what's called an endocrine disruptor. And these things can affect fertility. They can affect obesity, diabetes, different types of cancers like breast cancer, sex-related cancers, especially like prostate or breast cancer. Thyroid issues are a very big problem with these types of things. They can increase the risks of cardiovascular disease and stroke. They are linked to things like, I mentioned reproduction, growth as a general idea with kids, cognitive impairment, okay, neurodevelopmental disorders as a generality. Endocrine disruptors are a horrible thing in our society that is very pervasive and invasive in our society. So, I mean, it's something that is all over the place because plastics are everywhere. The alternative community was yelling about the dangers for decades. So prior to 2012, the alternative community was all over this. I can remember in the 90s telling clients and patients that they should switch to, stainless steel water bottles. Way back in the 90s, those are like very common now. You see a lot of those now, some really good products out there. We started, telling people about the dangers of microwaving plastics back then as well. And so I can remember in the 90s telling people about this stuff, but it wasn't until 2012 that the BPA was banned. And once again, that's only a small part of it. There's still other things that are in that as well. Things that you can do, don't microwave plastics, switch to a metal or a glass water bottle. Get away from the plastics, even if it's BPA free, doesn't matter. Get away from the plastic water bottles in general. Purchase safe non-stick pans as opposed to the traditional non-stick pans, or even use cast iron or steel pans instead. I love cast iron. I think cast iron is excellent. But those are things that you can do. This is another one of these things that the Western medical model still has not fully embraced the potential dangers that are inherent in plastics that people are using in their everyday lives. Plastic coatings, plastic bottles, plastic dishware, plastic, all these things. When you put these plastics into the dishwasher, once again, it changes the quality. So even coming out of a hot dishwasher and putting something into a plastic cup, that can even then be you drinking more microplastics. So that's a big issue, and it's one that's still ongoing. It's one that the, once again, alternative community has been yelling and screaming about for a long time, and that the Western model is still very slow at catching up with us. Still have not gotten there yet. One where another that can show this kind of a change over time is trans fats. Most of you probably understand trans fats, or at least have a partial understanding of it. Yes. Partially hydrogenated oils, aka trans fats. Once again, first started being used early 1900s or so. They were using it as a replacement for butter and lard. But it was as early as the 1950s that they started showing dangers in trans fatty acids. And then it wasn't until 2018 that they initiated a ban for trans fats. From the 1950s, when the dangers first started being shown, alternative community for decades screaming and yelling about the problems with trans fats, and some medical doctors really stepping forward and saying, hey, we're seeing more problems with heart and arteries now, and we think it's because trans fats, but being ignored because the major bodies, the CDC, the FDA, the AMTA as a general whole, were not supportive of changing these things because companies convinced them that it's not worth doing because it costs too much money to change these things, and the dangers are really not that real. Remember what they said about cigarettes. It was the cigarette companies for years saying, there's no information that says this. And then they were shown to be lying because their own research showed the properties of nicotine that were so harmful, and they denied that. They lied about that for decades and decades, and they're still allowed to exist. Once they were shown to have lied about that, they should have been shut down. The entire industry should have been shut down as a punishment for lying and putting people's health in danger for decades and decades. They should have shut the entire industry down as a punishment for that. There's no need for cigarettes. Once you start smoking them, you're addicted. It's very difficult. I get that. But, separate topic. Trans fats, similar in that sense, because once you start eating foods with trans fats, it's hard to stop those things. But the ban in 2018, here's kind of shows you how corporate health is put over societal health. In 2018, January 2018, the ban took effect. No more trans fats in foods. But that's really not the case. What they said was, we're putting the ban in right now, 2018, but you've got until 2021, Okay. You've got 3 years to start getting it out of your foods. So for the next 3 years, you can continue poisoning everybody, no problem. And even after 2021, if you have a bunch of product that was made with trans fatty acids, you can keep using that until it's gone. Okay. So your health was really not the priority here. If it was your health, they would have said, this stops now. This is showing severe damage to people's health. It needs to stop now, not tomorrow, not 3 years from now, but it needs to stop now if it was really about your health. But it wasn't really about your health. Okay. We want to make sure the corporations have time to find another way of doing this. So in the meantime, we'll keep poisoning you. Okay. Now, beyond that, let's look at the rest of the ban. The ban, your foods can still have up to a 0.5 gram of trans fat per serving. 0.5 gram, so 0.5 of a gram of trans fat per serving. That can still be sold legally. So even though we're saying that trans fats are not in food anymore, that's not necessarily true. If you see partially hydrogenated oils in your ingredient list, that means there's trans fats in there, even if it's not on the rest of the nutrition label. The reason it's not on the nutritional label is because they have altered the serving sizes to make sure that it only illustrates 0.5. That serving sizes for foods, they don't necessarily reflect what is a real serving size. And a lot of times that's because they're trying to circumvent the laws when it comes to calories and sodium and trans fat and all the saturated fat and things like that. If they make the serving size this unrealistic portion, okay, oh, here's your serving size. That's your serving size. Really? I could eat 15 of these, okay? And the average person is going to eat 15 of those. So that serving size is not a realistic serving size for the strict purpose of deceiving the public into thinking that here's the health information, it's okay. And for skirting the laws when it comes to things like trans fat. This serving size has only 0.5 grams. Now, when I eat 15 of those, you've got to multiply that up. Now you're right back to where you came from with the trans fats. And that's, once again, our government allowing corporations to be ahead of your health. Your health is not as important to the government as the profits from the corporations is. And that's the reason why these are allowed. Otherwise, why else would they do that? That's not a conspiracy theory. That's the flat reality of this. The flat reality of this is if it was really about your health, this stuff would be gone in its entirety. And there would be none of these loopholes that companies could jump through at all. When you consume a large quantity of trans fats, it can build up into your bloodstream. This has a lot of deleterious effects. It can increase your bad cholesterol, which is LDL, and lower your good cholesterol, which is the HDL. And so we can talk about cholesterol some other time and know why I'm saying this, but the LDL is increased, HDL is decreased, and there is some truth to the idea that LDL, when it's too high, can create damage, and HDL, when it is higher, has a protective quality. So yes, it can block arteries. It can create coronary artery disease. It can create inflammation. It's linked to cancers like prostate cancer, colorectal cancer. So trans fats have a lot of issues. These issues are confirmed. The government confirmed those. They can also confirm that they don't care about your health because of the way they set up the bans, but it's confirmed. And once again, this is a situation where the alternative community was yelling about this for forever. Once again, in the 90s, I remember talking to people about trans fatty acids saying, why are you eating margarine? Margarine is so unhealthy. It's full of trans fatty acids. You should be eating butter. Yeah, but butter's unhealthy. Okay, I'm not arguing that butter's healthy. I'm telling you it's healthier than eating the trans fatty acids. If you don't like the butter, then reduce your butter content, but don't switch it to this fake stuff and think that it's actually healthier than butter. I read an article recently that said, and I'm paraphrasing this because I don't remember the exact phrasing of the article title, but it said that margarine is now healthier than butter. I'm pretty close to accurate with that. You could probably look that up and find it. Margarine is now healthier than butter. And this came from, I think, a medical school, I think, that said this in a paper, which once again shows me the asinine thinking from that camp sometimes. Their reasoning was that now that trans fats are out of margarine, and margarine will have less saturated fat than butter, margarine is now better than butter. But the problem is this: your margarine is made from a variety of seed oils that have their own issues. So you're just switching one issue for another issue. It's not a matter of it being healthier. It's the same thing with the artificial sweeteners. You're changing one issue for another issue, and you're not being healthier. In fact, there's the potential that you're being worse healthy with the artificial stuff than with the natural stuff. So that's another topic. So the last 2 or 3 topics. So I wanted to mention a couple of topics that still are not recognized by the American Medical Association, but I will tell you that as a functional medicine practitioner, as someone in the alternative community, this is something that we've been talking about for decades. So one of those is adrenal fatigue. The American Medical Association and the Endocrinology Society, neither one of them recognize that adrenal fatigue exists. In fact, if you look up information from their perspective, it'll essentially say that anybody trying to sell you an idea about adrenal fatigue is a snake oil salesman, and that they're out to just take your money. I beg to differ. Okay, so let's look about that just a little bit. When we look at adrenal issues, the American Medical Association recognizes Cushing's and they recognize Addison's. Cushing's disease is basically hyperadrenal function. It's pretty much a rare condition. It's usually caused by something like a pituitary tumor or something like that. It's where your pituitary produces an excess amount of cortisol that leads to weight gain issues, moon face, which is this rounding of the face, this fatty tissue around the face, buffalo hump, which is a fatty pad back here, and a variety of other issues. That's hyperadrenal. On the other end, the AMA recognizes Addison's, which is hypoadrenal, which would be the opposite of this. It's also a rare condition. It's typically autoimmune. It's a deficiency in cortisol. It creates fatigue, muscle weakness, weight loss, and once again, a variety of other issues. AMA recognizes those two things, but it doesn't recognize anything in between that. And once again, that's that empirical mindset. The vitalistic mindset says, well, just because this is the extreme here and this is the extreme here, if you're not in one of these extremes, that doesn't mean that you're perfectly healthy. That there's a spectrum on this. If we look at this, there's a spectrum with adrenal fatigue that shows a problem. Okay, there's a spectrum, and so just because we have this spectrum of, just because they want to say that it only exists on one side or the other is not a reality. Let me show you a picture here. Come back over here and share this with you. So what you're going to see here, this is a adrenal fatigue graph. Of course, like I said, the American Medical Association is going to look at this and say that this is BS. There are a lot of Western medical doctors who have come over into the functional medicine field. In fact, they probably dominate that field now. They didn't at the beginning, but they probably do now. And they would probably, as a group, all agree in what I'm saying right now, that adrenal fatigue is a real thing, which goes against the AMA, which is, their association. But the core of that perspective, Western medical model, would look at this and say adrenal fatigue does not exist. You can do saliva testing, which they will tell you is not factual. You can do saliva testing. It is more, in my opinion, more accurate than looking at a blood test for adrenal function. Adrenal function with a blood test is a blip in time. that may or may not actually give you a real reading of what's happening with your adrenals. But when you do a saliva test, if it's done the way that I would usually have a saliva test done, it's a diurnal cycle. And so it's several saliva tests done over a period of time, over a period of a day, that gives you appearance of a cycle. And so when you look up here, you see this normal, and the dotted line is cortisol that comes from your adrenal glands. The bottom line is DHEA, also comes from your adrenal glands, and pregnenolone, which is what they call the mother hormone. And so in normal function, you see where these are. If it gets to the point that it is Cushing's, which is hyper, it could be way up in this area here. If it gets to the point where it's Addison's, it could be way down here where it is here. There is a spectrum. And in that spectrum, this curve doesn't have to be up here. It could be here. It could be wherever, down here. When you fall outside of the normal curves, there's going to be dysfunction. There's going to be dysfunction that is going to show symptomatology. And so when you get to adrenal fatigue has a variety of stages: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and failure of the adrenals. I've never seen someone in failure. I'm sure it exists for sure, but I've never had anybody in my office with failure. Stage 1, stage 2, even stage 3, early stage 3, I have seen. And I will tell you that with proper lifestyle changes, dietary changes, and proper supplementation, I've seen it reversed countless times. And I can tell you that that there are thousands of medical functional medicine doctors who would tell you the exact same thing, that with the proper care, these things can be reversed, that you will see the difference in those things. If you have adrenal fatigue, it's typically caused by some type of chronic stress. People with post-traumatic stress disorder, very, very susceptible to adrenal fatigue. It's basically a form of sympathetic overload. Okay. The symptoms, one of the big symptoms is brain fog. I jokingly refer to it as being a cotton-headed ninny muggins from the movie Elf. You get this brain fog, fatigue, sleeping issues where you have a hard time getting to sleep. Your brain's constantly chattering. You can't get to sleep. Anxiety, panic attacks. If increased sugar cravings, like really strong increased sugar cravings. Late afternoon crash. If you have a cycle where at somewhere past 2 o'clock or so, typically around 3 to 5 o'clock, you have this point in the day where you just hit this point and you just go, and it feels like you could just close your eyes and you'd be out like a light. That afternoon crash, that's a very common symptom of adrenal fatigue as well. An example of a medical doctor that I could give you, Dr. Isabella Wentz, who's a doctor of pharmacology. She's written a couple of books, which I have both of her books. She wrote one on Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is a thyroid condition. She also wrote one on adrenal fatigue. And in that, she talks about her own personal issues and her own personal journey that led her to investigating this information and writing these books, because she had her own physical problems. And going to all the Western medical doctors, they pretty much told her, it was all in her head, that it was this, that, or the other thing. And they gave her medications and none of it fixed anything. And it wasn't until going through functional medicine and through her own personal journey of talking to different alternative doctors that she found the information about adrenal fatigue, et cetera. And that was what changed her life. And she wrote these books. I think they're good books. I'm not going to say I agree with every single step that she uses for her treatment protocols. I have my own, but I will tell you that it's a great place to start. It's a good place to start. Rest, reducing stress, a paleo or keto diet is what I would usually recommend, and very specific supplementation helps with overcoming adrenal fatigue. But this is something that the Western medical model still to this day calls alternative practitioners, even Western medical doctor alternative practitioners, quacks. They say that we are basically just trying to sell you something and that this thing does not exist. Because they have not yet they're not yet able to solidify it with their empirical data. For them, it doesn't exist and it can't exist. And until they can do it like that, they refuse to accept it. At the same time, people's health are going down while they're denying it. That's why the alternative field does have an answer for that. And once again, if we can make it go away, then I think, to me, that's enough of a scientific proof for me that it went away when we did the steps that we did, because we said it was adrenal fatigue. Chronic fatigue, which tends to go along with adrenal fatigue, but not always, is one that the Western medical model has accepted. Fibromyalgia, which goes along with that also and can go along with adrenal fatigue, is another one that they haven't. Fibromyalgia, which is pain in the muscle and connective tissue, is for a long time, and it's mostly shows up in women. If a woman came into a medical doctor and complaining of these things, they would say, "Oh, she must be menstrual. It's in her head," and they would send you on your way with a sugar pill. They had no answer for it. They pretty much still have no answer for it. And once again, alternative fields do tend to be able to answer those questions for that. Another one in that same category would be leaky gut. Leaky gut is another one that's not recognized by the AMA. The digestive societies or whatever, they don't recognize this as well. Leaky gut is essentially when there is a problem with the intestinal barrier. And I've got a picture of that too to show you here to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. There you go. This is an image trying to explain leaky gut. So in a healthy digestive system, and when we say gut, we're typically talking about the small intestine. And so here would be a blood vessel, and here would be the cells of your digestive tract of your small intestine. This area up here would be the inside of your small intestine. So you eat your food and it breaks down. By the time it gets to your small intestine, it's going to be in very small particles. And this would be what would be in this in the gut, is this top layer up here. So in a healthy gut lining, look at the way the cells are being represented. You've got these nice, healthy junctions between the cells where everything is nice and tight. And here's the reason it has to be like that. When you eat food, that food has to be broken down into what's referred to as a monomer. Think of it as the lowest common denominator. It's the smallest particle that food breaks down into. That is what is supposed to be absorbed into your bloodstream. Those monomers get absorbed from proteins, carbohydrates, fats through the system to get into your body. When it does that, your body responds as it should, and it's healthy. Through a variety of different mechanisms, stress being one of those, chronic stress, overusage of antibiotics is another, improper food ingestion, poor diet is another. Let's put those together. Let's say you are a chronically stressed individual who gets sick and has to take antibiotics on a regular basis, and you have a poor diet, you smoke, etc. That is what can lead to this picture on the right. And now you see that there's these gaps, the junctions between the cells that are nice and clean over here on the left are now no longer existing. And when that happens, instead of stuff passing through the gut lining the way it's supposed to as a monomer, larger elements of these food particles can come through. Large intact proteins, for instance, can go through these barriers. When that occurs, your body says, wait a minute, what is this? What is this that just came into the system? This is not supposed to be there. The alarm call goes out, the immune system mobilizes, inflammation increases, and it causes a cascade of reactions. Those cascade of reactions can be increases in calories, increases in allergies, okay? It can be irritable bowel syndrome and other types of serious digestive issues, excessive gas, bloating, diarrhea. It can be other types of autoimmune conditions, skin conditions, mood disorders, neurological disorders. All of these things can be linked back to leaky gut, which when, a Western medical doctor says, your problem is you have irritable bowel syndrome. Your problem is you have Crohn's. Your problem is you have colitis. That may be the case, but it also may be the case that the step prior to that is leaky gut. So addressing this step is not going to be so helpful unless you take care of that first step first, and that's leaky gut. Once again, not recognized by the AMA. Most Western medical doctors would probably say that, anybody talking about leaky gut is a quack. Anybody talking about leaky gut is trying to sell you something, and that's it. As opposed to looking at it from the standpoint of a functional medicine doctor, which once again, lots of Western medical doctors or functional medicine doctors looking at this exact problem. Reducing your stress, changes in diet, low gluten or no gluten, increasing good fats in the diet. A keto type diet can be really good for that. Very specific supplementation, which would include good probiotics and prebiotics to change the gut flora. All of these things have to be done to take care of leaky gut. And once again, this is another one of these things that the Western medical system has not caught up to yet. They have got it wrong. Okay. We've covered lots of stuff. I want to just one little touch upon another thing that they have gotten wrong. And I will tell you that in recent times, the past 4 or 5 years have made more Western medical doctors come alive to this idea and start to move over to this camp is vaccines. I'll whisper it, vaccines. Maybe if I whisper it, the people who do censorship won't hear that I'm talking about vaccines. Vaccines may have lots of wonderful, good things. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I am anti-vaccines as a concept entirely. I think that if vaccines could be made in a very safe way and be proven and shown to not cause the problems that we suspect that they are causing, then I might be in favor of a vaccine program. But I will tell you that the vaccine program as it is has way too many problems, way too many question marks, way too many definites that we know for a fact are doing certain things. And as such, I don't approve of it as it is. So clear on that. Show me that it can be done properly, that it's not causing problems. Maybe it'll be the lifesaver that you want to say that it is, but otherwise it's not. More and more Western medical doctors are coming over to this side because they saw the problems with the COVID vaccines. They're seeing the problems with the COVID vaccines. They're seeing how that system is covering up and trying to cover up, not doing a great job of it, all of the issues and problems. When you've got a system that gives carte blanche to the producers of a product saying you have zero liability for this product, you can create this product, give it out to our children with zero liability to the person creating it. Yes, the government is going to take over that liability and do a crappy job of it and make you jump through hoops and then maybe get something, some fraction of something for causing the death or the neurological damage of your child. But the companies are getting no liability for that. And as such, the ones that are creating the product have zero responsibility for creating a safe product. And if you think that those companies, those pharmaceutical product companies are creating a safe product with no liability, you shouldn't be watching this show probably, because there's nothing I'm ever going to say that's going to come through to you at all. Because that concept of a company with zero liability being perfectly trustworthy and you're putting your kids' trust in that company is an insane idea to me. Insane. And it doesn't make any sense at all. When you can look, do the deep dive and find dozens and dozens and dozens of research papers that if it doesn't prove autism, at the very least makes a huge question mark in the direction of vaccines, Yet that camp says there is no research that shows any link between vaccines and autism. That's a straight out lie. That's a straight out bald-faced lie, because I can easily find you dozens of research papers. And then they would say, well, that's because those research papers are bad. Well, why are they bad? Because you didn't pay for them? Because it wasn't the pharmaceutical company that did the research saying that it's okay? And then the other part would be, what research do you have on these individual vaccines that shows that it doesn't cause this problem? There is none. There is none. Don't let them lie to you and tell you that there is. There's plenty of evidence to tell you that there's not that research that's done. That's what Bobby wants to do with vaccines. He's not wanting to take all your vaccines away. He wants to create research that is real, that's not paid for by the industry that does the production of this. He wants the agencies that are supposed to be protecting you to step up and do their job, okay? Do their damn job. That's what he wants those agencies to do. And that's what he's out there trying to fight for. And so we should be fighting for him, because he's going to be fighting for you and your kids, because he wants those agencies to step up and do the job that they're supposed to have done, because the information is there, the proof is there to show otherwise. Some medical doctors are coming over that. They're now starting to fight for these things. They're finally starting to say, yeah, this is not right. There's a myriad of doctors that I could list. I'm not going to go through a whole list of them here. We'll do it at some other point, who are now all over the podcasts, who are sharing that this is wrong. This is wrong. Now, those doctors, prior to that, a lot of those doctors were supporting vaccines wholeheartedly, and it took them a long time to get here. And I'm upset that it took them that long to get here, but I am also happy at the same time that they are here. If it took you a long time to get here, shame on you. But if you are here, we're going to put all that aside and say, welcome aboard. I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that you're on the side of reason, of real science, and of actually supporting your patient's health over the propaganda, the diatribe, the script of that side. I'm going to start to wrap this up, and I want to wrap it up by saying this. Nothing I'm saying in this episode or in any other future episode is meant to tell you that I think Western medicine should go the way of the dodo bird and be gone, okay? I think that Western medicine has a perfect place in our society. If I need medicine, if I need surgery, guarantee you I'm running to them for that. I want them there so that I have that availability. But I'm not looking to them for my health. I'm looking to them for crisis management. Surgeries and drugs are for crisis management. You want health? The other camp. Alternative medicine, functional medicine, that's really more of a directive towards health. And there's a lot of Western medical doctors, once again, that are going this way, that are now coming on the side and saying, let's look at the body as a whole system. Let's look at the body in a vitalistic way and approach it from a medical perspective from that vitalistic way. I totally support that. I think that's fantastic. And so when I'm making these statements, I'm trying to show you and criticize the things that are wrong. Not that the entire system is wrong, but that there are definitely things wrong. The days of Marcus Welby, and many of you may be too young to remember Marcus Welby, the days of that type of thinking of the perfect medical doctor as a God figure are long gone. Thank God for that. We need to question the system. Question this system too, but question the system. Make sure that you're doing your own due diligence, that you're using your own intelligence, and that you're trusting yourself and your body's ability to heal. Because that's really where the true health comes from. It comes from your body creating health. That is true health. That is masterful health, is your body doing that. You do the things in your life that feed and filter in health, this system will take care of itself. When it doesn't, and when there's a crisis, thank God Western medicine exists, okay? But don't expect that system to really be looking at you with health. And don't trust the corporate interests that influence and control all that either, because they have zero interest in your health, zero. Pharmaceutical companies, if they made everybody perfectly healthy with their products, they'd be out of business. It'd be a no-brainer for them. They'd be out of business. So they don't want you perfectly healthy. They want you healthy enough to keep living, but unhealthy enough to continue buying their products. They kind of want you sitting that fence. I feel kind of okay, kind of healthy. That's where they want you. Don't buy into that. Okay. Alternative community has gotten a lot right. I'm not saying they're perfect either. Okay. But there's lots of things they've gotten right, and the Western medical world has gotten incorrect and is still getting incorrect. So before you listen to someone denigrating your alternative practitioner, your chiropractor, your acupuncturist, your massage therapist, whatever, and calling them this or that, and that they're over here and and alternative stuff's over here, immediately shut your ears off. If they're trying to do this, okay, there's a problem. I'm not trying to do this. I'm not necessarily trying to do this. There's good and bads to both camps, and there's times to use both camps. Okay. But when it comes to actual health, you're getting a lot more in that direction, I think, than that direction. So I hope this has been educational. I hope it's been interesting and fun. We're going to wrap up this episode, and you will hopefully go to my links and click on those links and follow. Be one of the followers. Put it out there. Let me know that you love me. I also told you last time there is an email on there. You have to cut and paste that email, put it in there, and send an email. Tell me what you think about the program. Tell me ideas that you want for the future. Maybe even ask me some questions or give me a case study to review. All those things are welcome, and I really hope that you do that. And so until next time, good health. I'll see you later.